everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Power 365 Show. In this episode, I'm chatting with Ewan Dalton. He's the Partner Development Manager for ISVs in the cloud at Microsoft. He works with 6 of the creme de la creme of ISV partners in the world, based out of the United Kingdom. And a veteran at Microsoft. So it's an interesting conversation, definitely something that I felt I learned a lot from around, the ISV program's been running some time now, particularly the ISV Connect Program for biz app partners, and really what's changing, how things are affecting the way we look at this going forward, and even the opportunities for ISVs right now to work with Microsoft, the sellers out in market, and retire some of their quota and therefore get ISV attached to those deals. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guide.com/148. Now let's get on with the show. Ewan, welcome to the Power 365 Show.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Mate, it's good to have you on the show. We caught up recently at, Dynamic Community Summit, or Extreme it was, wasn't it, up in Orlando?
Yes, that's right. It was my first time at that event as well, so it was all good fun.
Yeah, so before we get started, I always like to get a bit of background on my guests, and tell me, what part of the world do you live in? Where do you call home?
Well, I live in the UK, near London, about 45 kilometres or so outside of London, if that's how you measure it. I'm originally from Scotland, from the West Coast, and then, like a lot of people, I moved for career and for personal happiness about 25 something years ago. I'm just kind of just outside Reading, if you know where that is.
Yeah. So when you say the West Coast of Scotland, what are the big attractions there?
Well, golf was a big part of it. It wasn't the reason why I lived there. I just happened to be born there. But it was.
Is that like close to St Andrews?
Well, actually, St Andrews is on the east coast.
I thought that was the other side. Yeah.
The west is famous for links courses like Royal Troon and Turnberry, which is now owned by the Trump organisation. So
wow.
It has its own charms, I'm sure.
Classic. And I always think of the West Coast then known for its whiskies.
Yeah, again, the whiskies tend to, you get quite a lot further north before you get into that. And then there's the different variants of how peaty they are, all that kind of stuff. So there's once you get up into the islands and the highlands, then that's when you get the whiskey. Yeah,
nice. And just in leaving London, as you know, moving back to New Zealand, a lady there, Alison, gave me, from London, she gave me a bottle of Bruichladdich Octomore whiskey, which is one of the highest peat contents from the island of Islay.
Okay.
Yeah, very nice. Golden colour, but yeah, beautiful drop. I don't know if you're into whiskies at all.
I'm not at all, actually. I can't stand the stuff.
So here's the thing, right? I am not a whiskey drinker at all. Like, for me, it's gin, it's vodka, it's rum. Those are my go-to, and tequila. But it was when I was on Islay that I had this whiskey there, and it's the first time I appreciated the very different flavour that it is, and being able to have it as a sipper type drink. But this is Octomore is the only whiskey I could say that about. Jack Daniels, any of the other ones out there, whether it be Jameson's from Ireland or Alberg or any of these other ones, it's just Lefroy. It just not for me.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story about whiskey before we get on to the meat of the podcast. So quite a few years ago now, I used to get asked to do the address to the haggis at a Burns supper, right? So if you're not familiar with this, it's an annual thing in January, and it celebrates the work of the poet Robbie Burns. The address to the haggis is this whole ceremonial thing where you basically address the dish that's been brought in front of you, and there's all kinds of actions you've got to do. And anyway, one of them is you have to pick up your glass of whiskey and toast to the haggis and then drown it in one. And of course, wow. I'm standing there going, I really can't. It would make me retch if I did that with a glass of whiskey. Yeah. So I ended up doing it with ginger ale instead. It was a complete fraud.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Anyway,
no one would know the difference, right?
No.
So you're living in Reading now. What do you do when you're kind of not working? What does hobbies look like for you? I see you've got a bit of a fetish for antique watches.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest obsession that's non-work related. So yeah, I collect. Well, they're not antiques necessarily. They're just watches that aren't brand new usually. But yeah, it's just one of those things. It's a bit weird when you're into technology as a thing to suddenly get obsessed with small bits of mechanical curiosity, you know. So yeah, that's a big part of it. And music and cars and other things as well. So
nice.
So yes.
I like that word, curiosity. It's something I came across quite a bit in London. We got a book called The Curiosities of London, and it's a cool word. So, kind of, what do you look for in a watch?
It depends really. Obviously, you could, if some people who would collect watches would do it because they think they're going to make money off it, and you know, some people have made a lot of money off that because, like, a lot of these things, like classic cars and, you know, wines and things like that, you know, the values over time have tended to rise, especially when you don't get much interest return from putting money in the bank. People would think of other ways that you could enjoy your savings, if you will, and the values will rise over time. So some people would go for that. I would just say I wear all of my watches. So I wouldn't buy one that I wasn't prepared to wear. And therefore, the first thing that is important to me is, do I like it? Do I like the look of it? Does it feel like it's a cool thing? And of course, that taste changes over time as well. So there'll be stuff that I have now that even 2 years ago I would never have considered. But it's just, you know, because you see photos and you think, oh, I like that, and then you see one in your hand with somebody else gives it to you. So, you know, I go to various watch meetups where you know, people will come, and there might be, you know, a lot of money's worth of watches there, and they're just happy to pan them around and let people, you know, try them on and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's all.
Do you kind of stick with kind of Swiss watchmakers, or is that not a factor for you?
It kind of is, because those are the most well known, and you know, if you think, like, the golden era for me of mechanical watches was sort of the 1960s till the end of the 70s, because by the end of the 70s mechanical watches were almost dead. You know, the quartz watch killed off a lot of the old brands and what have you. So so that's the sort of the you know, the area of focus really. And in that time, the majority of the stuff that's still around today was made in Switzerland, because that was where that was the centre of the watch industry. But interestingly, I think it's interesting anyway. The Japanese watch industry's an interesting parallel to the Swiss one. So you know, I've got a thing for this particular kind of Seiko watch, which was arguably the very first automatic chronograph watch, so the stopwatch on your wrist, but it wound itself. And there was a whole thing of the Swiss trying to outdo each other to who was going to be first to market with this. And Seiko just quietly released these watches and maybe beat the Swiss to the market by several months. And then years later, it got spotted that an American astronaut had gone up onto Skylab in the mid-70s, and he happened to be wearing this fairly distinctive looking watch. And somebody wrote to the astronaut at the time and said, the guy's name was Bill Pogue, and they said, you know, tell me about that watch you're wearing. And he then replied back and he told them where he got it from and everything. And it became, well, it was realized then that was the very first time anyone had ever worn an automatic chronograph watch in space. Wow. So stuff like that with the backstory and all of the things like that. It just keeps you busy.
Very cool. Very cool. So you work for Microsoft. You've been in there, I was going to say not very long, but over 20 years, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. 22 years at the moment, 22 and a half years.
Wow, that's a good wee while.
It is, yeah. It's not something that I think anyone who ends up in one company for that amount of time, unless it's your own company perhaps, I don't think you would expect to have been like that when you joined. You know, it's just it just ends up that way. And I suppose the reason for why I'm still at Microsoft is kind of, I've always had a sort of some deep-seated belief that, you know, the stuff that Microsoft is doing is, you know, it's good. It might not always be the very best, but it's certainly good enough, and it's interesting to be part of that. And being, you know, in such a large company, so geographically dispersed as well, there's a lot of people who they come in to do one thing, and then a few years later they find they're doing something totally different. So my manager, for example, he joined in London, and he now lives in Redmond, and he's covering things that he never did before. I've done technical sales, partner. I've been a manager. I've been product engineering. All of these things which you just don't get the chance to do in many other organizations.
So how did you come to get involved in the BizApp side of things, and specifically the ISV side of BizApps?
Well, it kind of found me, I think. I'd spent the last 7 years working with ISVs in the Azure business. So, back in the day, in 2012, when I started doing that, you go to any company that was writing software and deploying it on the cloud was, they weren't necessarily very unusual, but they weren't 10 a penny. And we were looking into companies that were using Azure and deploying whatever their solution was, and would consider that if they spent a few $1,000s, then that was a really good thing, and they were obviously they were doing something serious. And then obviously, as we know, that since then the cloud market's exploded, and nowadays some of those companies that would spend $1,000 a month are spending $1 million a month.
Exactly.
So it's a completely different ballgame, and it's far more central to Microsoft's future strategy. This cloud platform that underpins everything else. So part of the reason why I'm in BizApps is because I've done the Azure thing for 7 years, and to be quite honest, everybody else is doing that now. It's quite nice being one of the guys that are doing things that nobody else knows anything about. That's one of the reasons I thought that the business applications and the Dynamics Power Platform space was kind of interesting. And also, it's more European centric than American centric. So being in the UK, I found that I ended up with a lot of companies that were based in the US that I spent all my time working with, and I just thought it would be quite nice to do something that's a little bit, the other direction, a bit closer to the time zone and everything. So it kind of worked out quite well that way.
So one of the things that I've heard, out in the community since Googs has come into his role, is around, he also came from that Azure kind of background and the marketplace and things like that. And one of the common things I hear is, from ISVs, is that BizApps, or the way you sell BizApps, is not the way you sell on Azure. And, even the business model around Azure, which is consumption-based, BizApps still tend to be more the Office 365 licensing model, which is, monthly subscription, not really tied to a consumption model at all. How do you see that in your mind? Is that difference between a consumption model, which was Azure, and more of a monthly licensing model that you see around on Office 365 now, of course, with the Power Platform as well?
Well, it's an interesting shift in dynamics, and I don't mean that. I mean that with a small d rather than a capital D.
Yes.
I don't actually think there is as big a difference as some people think, and the reason for that is, if you put your mind so if I'm talking with an ISV, and an ISV is a company who doesn't really care about the platform usually. I mean, in the case of the Microsoft Dynamics platform, I think there's a much tighter connection between ISVs that write software that runs on the Dynamics platform than there might be on some other platforms, just because they've been probably doing it for longer. And maybe they even started the company up with a product that ran on top of an older part of the Dynamics family. But in the truest sense of it, though, an ISV is a company who wants to sell their software, and they don't really care what platform it runs on. So in the old days of on-prem stuff, you might say, I've written this software and it runs on Sun and Oracle, and it's written in Java, and it does whatever it does. And if Microsoft came knocking to the ISV and said, why don't you bring your application so that it runs on SQL and Windows and .NET, the ISV might say, I don't care. Just don't. It doesn't make any difference to the end customer that's buying this thing for what it does. They don't necessarily care how it's delivered. So the conversation that you might have as a technology provider like Microsoft and that ISV has traditionally been based on, well, if you use our technology, it's better technology, therefore it'll be better for you to build your products on it. As things have moved into the cloud, however, it's becoming less of a concern about what language the thing is written in or what database it uses or whatever. It's more a case of the Azure platform is it scales widely, it's secured in a way that others might not be as secure, or the on-premises certainly probably isn't. And there's all the benefits that an ISV might get from running the thing that they sell to their customers on Azure versus doing it some other way. But when it actually comes down to them selling that to the customer, it almost doesn't matter, except for obviously the customer might want to know that it's met all the right certifications for security and data privacy and all of that stuff. But when it comes down to it, the customer's not buying Azure, they're buying the ISV's product. Now, the same thing really could be argued is true when a customer buys an ISV's product that runs on Dynamics. The customer doesn't buy it because it's on Dynamics, it buys it because it meets the needs that they've got. And therefore, the fact that the underlying means of licensing and everything else is slightly different, or radically different maybe even, isn't actually as big a deal when it comes to the end customer as I think we may give it thought.
Yeah.
So it's a difference in the way that the partner, the ISV partner, deals with the technology provider, Microsoft in this case. The way that the licensing is handled and the margins they make on it and everything else are different, and that might change over time as well. I mean, we're starting to see much more subscription-oriented stuff that doesn't confer any long-term rights of ownership. And again, in the Azure world, it's pay as you go. It's on-demand pricing, but increasingly, and not just with Azure, but with the other cloud platforms as well, customers want to get into saying, "I'll give you this much money in advance, knowing what I'm going to buy that enough capacity." So they'll pre-commit effectively. So they don't want that uncertainty of the pay-as-you-go model or the on-demand model. They want to buy a certain amount of capacity. So it's changing in both directions, I think.
Yes. So I only partially agree with what you've said in that, with Dynamics 365, often ISVs are very much targeting that platform. You're talking about the customers don't really care, but often it is around on, the kind of things I've seen from customers is, we've committed to Microsoft. We're committed to them being our platform of choice. We're all in, so to speak. And they're very much going, hey, we might have an ERP system in place that is Dynamics 365 or a Business Central. They might be using sales or customer service, etc. And they're very much wanting those add-ons to be compatible and to work seamlessly with those, rather than going out and buying an app to do a specific, point solution that then has to be integrated back into that. So, my perception would be more that people, as an ISVs particularly, definitely choose either Dynamics 365 or the Power Platform very specifically because they're addressing an audience that are already either consuming that platform or quite likely plan on consuming that platform.
Yeah, I think there are shades of grey in all of these things. And in fact, the customers do have they are likely to express a preference for the platform that they want their business applications to run on because, like you say, they've already invested in it. Maybe they know how to use it and how to add on other components into it. They might even develop on it themselves. But fundamentally, it is the most important thing for a customer buying an ISV solution is whether it's running on Dynamics or not, or is it that the ISV solution meets the customer needs? And I would say it's probably the latter. Yeah. But the Dynamics or the choice of platform clearly is an influencing factor. In fact, just like the public cloud platform discussions that sometimes go on between a customer and the likes of Microsoft, they will express a preference because you may just say, we buy all of our stuff from Microsoft, therefore that's why we're going to use Azure. Or it could even be, I'm a retailer and I'm not going to buy a cloud platform from my biggest competitor, so I'm going to buy it from you instead, or I might even buy it from Google or whatever.
Makes sense. So tell us a bit about your role and how what are you responsible specifically in this ISV ecosystem with BizApps?
Well, there are a few people in my role that sit within the larger ISV organization that, frankly, is mostly dealing with the other aspects of the Azure and the Teams piece of the puzzle, which is the Teams bit's relatively new, and that's getting more and more traction. But the Biz Apps piece, we've invested in it, basically doubling the size of the team in the last year or so, and
wow.
It's essentially we manage relationships with a small number of hand-picked ISVs, and those are not necessarily the most well-known. They're not necessarily the biggest, but in terms of the amount of money they spend or the amount of customers they drive, they've been selected by a bunch of criteria, largely driven by the business applications business group inside of Microsoft, so the people that are kind of responsible for the Biz App strategy. And they've picked, they've got a short list of, let's say, 100 or so. They go, these are the top ISVs that we think are doing stuff on our platform. And one way or another, they've picked the top, say, 20 of them and said, right, these are the guys that we're going to have a specifically closer relationship with. And it may be because we see great potential in there. It may be that they are really, really important to their customer base, and therefore, we can help them be sticky in that customer, and therefore Dynamics will be sticky in it too. Or in fact, it may be these guys they just need a bit more help at the moment, and once we've got them up and running, then we can actually maybe move them to some other way of interacting with us, and somebody else will come take their place. So it depends on how you slot them in. There are different types of people, some of whom are much more in that kind of recruitment phase where they're thinking about let's help these guys get on the bus and get up and running, and then they will transition to something else, and that might be a deeper form of management, or it may even be you don't need us anymore because you can do all this yourself, so here's a set of resources that you can take care of yourself from now on. We don't quite know how that's going to work out exactly.
So of that mix, just what are you seeing at the moment? Are you seeing more the pendulum's more on the Dynamics 365 side of things? So basically ISVs that interface using dependency on Dynamics 365, or are you seeing a greater percentage going just for the pure Power Platform play and building without any Dynamics 365 dependency?
Good question.
Just in that, like that 20 odd at the moment, just so we keep the pie small from a perspective.
Yeah, that 20 odd, I think you would say 100% Dynamics 365. I mean, realistically, the reason why they're in there is because they've got an existing business and they're transforming it rather than building a new thing on Power Apps or whatever. And
that makes sense to me.
And again, realistically, there is no long-term future for monolithic on-premises software, basically.
No.
So if anybody's saying no, we don't do it online, we'd be like, well, we wish you all the best, but that's not the direction we're going in. So we're not going to be doing much that we can position to help you here.
Yeah, makes sense. Just in that top 20 view again, I just got a couple of, either that or something else. What's the split between online and on-premise, as in that, I assume they're all online, but of those top 20, how many of them would support an on-premise scenario besides an online scenario?
I don't have the numbers in my head at the moment necessarily, but I would say the majority have got some on-premises history.
Interesting. Yep.
Now, whether they consider those legacy platforms, heritage platforms, whatever you want to call them, they might consider them as things that they have to do because they've got customers that are still contracted to use them, but they're not developing them anymore. And they would say to that customer that, get off this thing and move on to the cloud one, otherwise, you're not going to be a customer too long. But I think most of them have been around for at least a few years, so they've therefore more likely got a more traditional on-prem thing. I don't think any of them don't have an online offering.
Yeah.
But some of the, certainly a good few of the ones that do both, you might actually find that the majority of their business is still on premises.
Yeah.
They've got customers that might be signed up for 5-year plus agreements, and again, particularly in the ERP world, it's not a system that tends to be on the bleeding edge. It's so connected to everything else that goes on inside of the customer's business that it's not going to be one of the things that migrate early. And in fact, this is possibly one of the sort of key points about the Dynamics migration to the cloud and Dynamics 365 online, is that a lot of our customers have gone through early stages where they've moved key applications into the cloud. They've taken VMs that were on premises and put them in the cloud. They've moved their email and their online collaboration and all of that stuff, either by migrating it or by buying into new things like Teams or Slack or whatever. So they've kind of done it anyway, and they may well be using CRM that's always been in the cloud or whatever. But there's still a kind of hardcore legacy, traditional on-prem ERP type software that, again, a lot of customers are now going, this stuff's 10 or 15 years old, but in various ways, it's now time to make the move. And we think there's a massive opportunity for online ERP type services without them being the same big monolithic ERP software. Instead of, it might be a whole series of microservices or things that could be combined to form an online service that a customer would use, and we think that's a great opportunity for ISVs and the customers too, obviously.
Makes sense. Of that top 20, once again, what's the split across F&O, Business Central / sales support or marketing?
Well, the Business Central is actually very low in that top 20. And it's not because it's not an important product stream. It's more because the typical customers for Business Central are SMB, maybe up to mid-market, let's say. And one of the reasons why we're getting closer to this top 20 to start with was to be part of the new ISV, the Business Applications ISV Connect Program that Microsoft started rolling out. And but I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But the idea behind that was, it's a way of us being able to work more closely with partners in jointly servicing our customers and in finding opportunities and converting them into leads and wins and all the rest of it. And generally speaking, the kinds of customers who buy Business Central don't have a direct account management relationship with Microsoft. So there's very little that we can do to help those partners. And therefore, Business Central isn't part of the ISV Connect program at the moment. The plan is at some point there will be a way that it'll be involved in it, but as the ISV Connect that launched at the moment doesn't include BC. So therefore, that the top 20 ISVs that we're managing basically isn't, we're not targeting any BC. Although again, some of them have got very strong BC products. There's two of the partners I work with, for example, are pretty much 50-50 F&O and BC. And then to the other part of it, there's, I would say, the F&O versus customer engagement is probably 80-20, 75-25, something like that. That's the way. That's a good gut feel for me, anyway.
Interesting. And like, you manage 20. Did you say there are 2 or 3 other people that are they all managing around 20 each? Or you got 100 in the mix?
No, actually, I don't manage 20. There's me and 2 of my colleagues manage 20 between us.
Wow. Okay.
And then there's another team that was relatively new. So again, over the last year or so, and they are principally managing the kind of the recruit bit. So the next set that might be partners that don't do any biz apps with Microsoft at the moment, and we're trying to help them build that capability. Or they do have some nascent product set, and they're trying to bring it up to date and all the rest of it. So the recruit type, it probably takes care of the rest of the 80 out of the top 100. But it just means that I've got 6 partners that I work with, for example.
Yeah. So what are you looking for from a recruit motion? What DNA do you look for in an ISV or a potential ISV that would, want you to start conversations from a recruitment perspective? As in, when I say you, as in Microsoft.
I suppose it's a combination of things, really. There's are they successful already? If they're a startup, it's a different set of criteria that you would look for than if they're an established business. So if they're an established ISV in whichever sphere they're in. They might be a CRM based ISV that's does a great deal of work with Salesforce at the moment. They might be
Yep.
an on-prem ERP or even a cloud ERP using another platform. The goal there would be to say to them, listen, we think there's a great opportunity for you to work with Microsoft in the BizApp space, and if assuming the partner decides that's something they want to do, then we've got resources that we can put to bear to help them do that, and that's the recruit decision ultimately. There's also a factor of, are these partners particularly strong in a given vertical? So you can imagine. And I'm going to use this as an example, of which there are many, but you can imagine in the automotive industry, for example, there are a number of types of application that you'll just find all over the place. So dealer management systems, for example. Every car dealer is going to have very similar requirements, regardless of whether they're selling BMWs or Skodas or whatever. And therefore, if you could get an ISV who's really strong and has got a good name and what have you, and they happen not to be on the Dynamics platform today, and they move to the Dynamics platform through the work that they decide to do and that we can help them with, then suddenly that means you could make it that Dynamics would be the premium choice of platform for anyone in the automotive industry.
Correct.
Or anyone in retail, or anyone in finance, or whatever. So there are a number of these landmark, almost kind of gravity well kind of applications that, if you do it right, you will just attract other partners to that solution, as well as obviously the customers that buy the thing. And it's interesting when you look at the interplay between different types of partner and the customer itself. Microsoft obviously has resellers that are they exist to make margin out of selling software licenses. There are systems integrators that make money out of selling people skills, and then there are ISVs who make money out of selling their own IP. And of course, there isn't always a clean distinction between these different types. You might have a company that's got professional services, but they really exist because without the PS department, then they wouldn't be able to deploy their IP very successfully or as successfully. And you'll have other companies that they just happen to make money out of repeatable IP because it's money for old rope, but in reality they are there because they've got 10,000 consultants that need to be kept busy all the time. When you start looking at the way that these things interplay with each other, the ISV business is particularly interesting in the basis that it's the only one I've ever come across that what the customer wants and what the ISV want and what the technology provider like Microsoft in this case want are largely the same thing. There's a 80% overlap in the Venn diagram or whatever. Whereas in a lot of cases, an SI couldn't care less about things that are important to Microsoft. The customer doesn't necessarily want to use an SI other than they see it as a necessary evil. A reseller is only there to make money that, again, people would rather go direct sometimes. All of these things are in conflict to some other part. But in the ISV world, I think there's more synergy than conflict. And that's one of the reasons why I find it so interesting.
So good. So what about the I understand that Microsoft, particularly around the ISV Connect program, they're intending and attracting a whole bunch of brand new ISVs that could be coming from two kind of areas. One, as you say, they're already on another platform and they might choose to re-platform across to Microsoft. And then what about the situation where you've got, just the brand new startup that they might have, got some serious capital behind them, and they've got a solid business model, they've got established market opportunity, as in it's a validated market, there's other players already in it, but on other technologies. How does Microsoft look at something like that they do see as totally complementary to the suite that they have and will enhance sales? How does Microsoft look at a startup like that?
Well, I suppose it depends on what goes on behind them, really. There are plenty of examples of startup companies where they've gone, maybe they've had great amounts of investment in them to start with, and they've just hit some kind of zeitgeist that means everybody's talking about them and everybody wants to buy into them, either investors or potential customers. Stepping aside from BizApps for a moment, you've got companies like Snowflake, for example, who raised a load of money, were insanely successful, They've had some challenges as well over the time, the growing pains, all the rest of it. But for certainly for a couple of years, Snowflake was all over the place, and they were, winning business that a couple of years previous to that you would have had a hard job imagining a startup would have come in and been credible in. So these kinds of organizations they appear all the time, and it depends on who's behind them, both in terms of what backing and money they've got, but also the skills, the experience,
correct,
of the founders and the people that are associated with them. Because you can bet your bottom dollar that kind of thing is going to happen more often now than it ever has before at the scale that it would do now. Just because it's arguably a lot less difficult from a technical point of view, at least, to come up with an idea and get it to market quickly than it has ever been, and customers can adopt it a lot more easily than they used to as well, and they're more willing to do that as well.
Yeah, makes sense. So when you look at an ISV and you kind of look at the patterns that make a successful ISV, what do you see based on your experience?
What does it take for an ISV to be successful in their own right is kind of, I've no pretense that I'm going to give anyone advice about that. It's entirely up to them, because their business is something that is, peculiar to them in that respect. I've seen ISVs before where they've come up with business models and ideas for products that you would just never have imagined that there would have been such a need for it. And then in a short space of time, they become pretty commonplace. The idea of pricing engines, for example, that if you're a retailer,
CPQ type stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But the kind of automated one where they'll be able to say, well, 80% of the people that are selling the same set of products that you've got are 5% more expensive than you are, so therefore you can put your price up and you make more money. All of that kind of thing, which prior to the explosion of online commerce, there wasn't a need for it, at least in that sort of real time scale. Things like that people are inventing all the time, and I'm sure there are 101 other examples that are that are out there where a few years ago you wouldn't even have known that there was a need for that kind of application, yet there are people making money building them now. So what does it take for the ISV to be successful? Well, I guess they've got to have a good idea, they've got to have the right kind of engineering skills, and they've got to have ideally a ready customer base that they don't need to convince. They need to buy into this business idea. So you're not hawking around an idea to a customer that doesn't know they want it yet. And in some ways, actually, the more kind of interesting cases like that start from within a different type of company. So they might begin as an SI who's selling consulting services, and as part of that, they build a product. And then I've seen cases where an ISV has basically been spun out of an SI as a joint venture between the SI and the customer that they were consulting with. So the customer owns part of the IP that was developed as part of their engagement, and then they go on to sell that to all of their, maybe even that customer's competition. So that sort of thing. There's all sorts of cases like that. But to be a bit more specific about what about an ISV being successful in the Microsoft ecosystem, on the Biz Apps platform, etc. I think helping to figure out what's important to the Microsoft people that you're dealing with will give you a leg up against your competition if that's something that's important to you. So when you're talking to an account executive that owns a relationship with an enterprise customer, just calling them up saying, "Hi, I want to talk to you about your customer." They may get 10 of those calls every day. So if you can be crisp about how you think, why should this guy care about who I am? Because he might not know the name of the partner, he might not have any interest in the technology sphere. That might be an account executive who's literally trying to sell everything to that customer.
Exactly.
Therefore, they don't know anything about the peculiarities of the Power Platform or whatever. They just might not understand it. Therefore, the tack to take there from a co-selling point of view would basically be to say to the account executive, I'm from this partner. We've already got opportunities in this customer that we believe is obviously your customer. We think they're going to close on this date, and it's going to be worth this amount of money to us. Maybe that's about that amount of money to you. So if you say to them, I've got an opportunity at this big retailer, it's worth $1 million to me, and it's going to close at the end of June. and we think it's going to drive 200 grand's worth of licenses for the Dynamics platform or whatever.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk to me about this and see if we can help each other? Of course, they're going to be more interested than,
Exactly.
Hi, I'd like to talk to you about your retailer customer.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. So, you started there with the mention of an account executive, but often, as you say, account executives is trying to sell everything into their account, right? They're often only have one or two accounts. What's the next layer down of interest? One of the things that we discussed, you actually presented on at Community Summit or at Extreme 365 was that in the FY20 year, there's a motion around retiring 5% of target or something like that if an ISV isn't attached to a deal. Who's that more meaningful to, the account executive or TSPs, SSPs? What are the other people that really means something to, that they can retire, 5% of their quota?
Yeah, well, I mean, it applies to a bunch of different roles. There are specialist roles, both technical and sales specialists, that tend to gravitate around a given product set. There are industry specialist sellers as well, so people that would be, particularly plugged into what the retail industry is doing or the finance industry or whatever. And these people tend to, they kind of, I like to think of it as they coagulate around an opportunity. So somebody that identifies that the customer wants this thing, either because the customer's told them or because they've seen it in other customers and they figured out that there's an opportunity here. So they start, assembling this virtual team of specialists from across the business, both technical, sales specialists, industry expertise, marketing people, all the rest of it. And what you were referring to about the 5% piece was a kind of cherry on the cake for the co-selling initiatives as a whole. So basically what co-selling is all about is when the partner who's selling something that consumes Microsoft's licenses under the covers goes into a customer, we don't necessarily know how much that's going to be worth to Microsoft in the long term. So co-selling has a framework that basically says what we'll do is when the partner comes into us and says this is worth $1 million to the partner, we'll pay a percentage of that in quota relief to a bunch of salespeople that are associated with it. In other words, if I'm an account exec and this partner's just closed $1 million deal in my business, in my customer, I could claim $100,000 of quota relief. So in other words, all it does is it makes it look like my quota's been bumped up, my attainment on my quota's been bumped up by 100 grand. Without it being real money, it just means I get to the finish line quicker if I'm a sales guy. What you referred to about the 5% thing is a fairly short-term initiative. In other words, it's probably only going to be until the end of March next year. And it's basically saying for ISVs that sign up for the Business Applications ISV Connect Program, which we mentioned earlier on, they can choose which solutions they want to enroll in that program. So I might have an ISV with 10 different solutions, but I'm only really interested in these 3 or 4 as being things that I want to actively co-sell with Microsoft on. The rest of them just sell themselves, or they are, they're sold into Business Central or whatever. So therefore, I'm going to exclude them from this program. Once I've enrolled each of the solutions, I could decide this solution is of particular value to me and to the customer. Therefore, I want to nominate that to be a premium application, if you like. And based on a number of other factors, we may actually approach the ISV and say, listen, this application's got all of the factors that make it look like it should be a premium app. Do you want to enroll it in there? And what that means ultimately is the ISV pays more to Microsoft for the act of co-selling with them of that solution. And effectively that skews things by saying that means that because an account exec is ultimately going to get paid a bigger chunk of money in quota relief and whatever, they'll be more interested in dealing with those premium applications than they will with all of the rest of them. And we don't expect them, we're not talking about there's going to be thousands of these. I think Googs has talked about there being maybe about 100 premium applications out there, and there might be 10,000 other ones, but the top ones will be genuinely seen as positively vetted in a number of ways, certified and so on. And this 5% initiative is one that basically says if you're a seller who's carrying a Dynamics quota, a business applications quota, I should say, then when you've closed some business in your customer that's above a certain threshold with a premium tier ISV, and it's the first time you've done that this fiscal year, you will get a one-off retirement of 5% of your Dynamics quota. So again, if you're carrying a, 100, not that many people, I doubt if anybody is carrying $100 million Dynamics quota, but if you were, then suddenly, boom, that's $5 million off my quota just for doing this piece of work with that one ISV. And the point of that is to supposedly to kind of bootstrap the motion within our sales field of saying, I want to find all the premium ISVs that are out there and make sure they're connected into all of my customers, because I want to see them succeed, because I will ultimately do well because of it.
Yeah. So ISV Connect programs, it's been talked about since around March, I think, 2019. It's now in full effect. Can you just break down in your mind what the ISV Connect program is, and how any ISV, if they want to get involved, how do they get involved with it?
I mean, this is one of those moments where you think I could well say something that's going to get me fired here. So please, don't hear from me again. Then, So the ISV Connect program, it aims to do a number of things. I think the fundamental thing for me, though, is imagine the world where you, as an on-premises Dynamics AX ISV, you would have installed software that ran on a customer's premises, maybe on the same physical equipment that's running AX, or maybe next to that on some other servers. You'd have had to license the operating systems and the databases and everything else that sat underneath them. And then you'd have to maintain them and back them up and blah, 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 right? So you would be responsible for running the cost of that infrastructure, or the customer would. But then that would be factored into the overall cost of ownership and everything.
Yeah.
When the customer moves to Dynamics 365 Online, the infrastructure costs and all of the management and overheads and everything for the underlying Dynamics bit of their solution are now taken care of. Customer buys a subscription and a license to Dynamics, and that's what ultimately funds that environment. So if the customer was doing nothing other than out-of-the-box Dynamics, which of course hardly anyone is, then they would be entirely like-for-like provisioned, and they would just be buying that as a subscription. If they've got an ISV solution that runs on top of that environment, however, now what's happening is the ISV gets deployed on top of Microsoft's infrastructure that's also being used to provide the service to the customer. And the side effect of this is the team that runs that infrastructure is now getting a bill from the Azure team at Microsoft. And I've heard some really big numbers, like hundreds of millions of dollars a year.
Wow.
Is the bill that's coming back to them, because they're saying, well, you've got all these ISVs that are provisioning stuff that's running on our tenant because the customer wants it to happen. And we're not necessarily charging the customer. We're not charging the customer anymore because an ISV has been provisioned to run on their environment. It's not costing them anymore from a licensing point of view. And ultimately what's happened is it's grown to the size where they're saying, right, well, it's now time to take this thing, because it's got a certain level of maturity, and say, right, we now want to find a way that we can sustainably cover the costs of all of these ISV solutions that are running on top of that platform. But
makes sense.
So therefore, we're going to ask ISVs to pay for it, basically.
Totally makes sense.
I mean, sometimes when you lay it out like that, you could say, okay, I suppose you've got a point. I mean, you could turn around on the flip side of it and say, but Microsoft, you've got all this money, you're taking money out of an ISV that can't afford it, all of that stuff. And I've a certain degree of sympathy with different versions of that argument. But at a fundamental level, they're basically saying we're trying to do cost recovery here. At least some part of it. I mean, again, there's another version of the story that says the money that we're expecting to get back through this ISV Connect program isn't going to even come close to covering the cost, but it's something that we feel is, I hate using the phrase, but put some skin in the game, basically.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, what we're saying we're going to do as part of this program is we will actually invest all of the money that we get back from this into field incentives. So again, there's that version of the story that says, if Microsoft gets $100 million from ISVs in the next 12 months through ISV Connect, that will all have been paid out to people at Microsoft to help those ISVs win more business. Now that does. If you say, well, hang on a minute ago you were telling me it's to cover the cost of the Azure bill. I'm not quite sure what proportion is where, but that's the gist of it. Is it's probably not going to be enough money to do both, but we're spending money in both of those areas at least.
Yeah. So just before we go into some quickfire questions to wrap up with, we touched on it before a bit about SIs transitioning to ISVs, and are you seeing much of that happen? In my experience is a lot of SIs have a model that is around, selling time, consulting services, that type of thing. And when you go and just sell pure product as an ISV does without necessarily any wraparound consulting services, it's quite a different business model. You've got to invest maybe for 9 months to 12 months before you see a result. And the traditional SIs used to, putting another body out on a project and getting paid for it. What are you seeing any kind of, ISVs that are coming out of, like you mentioned, the one, where they might do something with a customer, but, are you seeing success stories?
Yeah, it's happening all the time. And I think the move to the cloud is probably not a great time to be a traditional SI.
Yeah.
So if your business was traditionally go in there and sell, an Exchange or a SharePoint upgrade every 5 years to the customer, then as soon as that's moved on to Office 365, then that's your job is done. You need to sell the customer something else. Yeah, so you need to figure a way of being valid and relevant to them rather than doing migrations. So most SIs over the last few years, it seems, have been looking for ways to transform themselves into service providers. So that might be a managed service provider where they'll say, we'll carry on giving you service, but we'll take care of all of it for you, the help desk all the way down to the desktop or whatever. It might be that they are selling packages of services. So it's not just we'll come in and implement this thing and then we'll get out and that's you done. It could be an ongoing thing where we'll implement this solution, whatever it is, and we will then be responsible for making sure that you get all the benefits out of that you think you're going to, by training the users better, by doing other work that is complementary. That's where the whole customer success manager kind of role starts to come in, where you're not selling to the customer anymore because they've already bought the thing from you, but you feel that you need to invest in them to make sure they're getting most out of your services and out of your solution.
Yeah.
So anyway, a lot of SIs have been on that journey. There are others who have decided for one reason or another to spin out as an ISV, a separate part of their business. And it could be that the thing that they're selling as a product was actually developed by a customer as a bespoke project. And I've seen this happen on many occasions where, the ISV might actually have invested a bit more effort into the SI would have invested more money and effort into the development than they were charging the customer for, on the basis that the customer was helping them out by helping them build the requirements for a product. And once they built it once, they sell that to that customer, and they might have 85-90% of the common code is on the shelf, and next time another customer comes along, they basically sell it to them as if they're getting a bespoke product. And they just lift and shift 90% and then tweak the rest of it. And that's maybe a slightly more traditional way of the SI moving into an ISV. But as things become much more multi-tenanted, online delivered, customers' expectations might be, I don't want a bit of bespoke stuff that's completely tailored to me. I want something that's more or less off the shelf and configured for my requirements. And in fact, I prefer it if it was built by, are built in conjunction with a major brand like Microsoft. So that's where, if you're based it on Dynamics, then they'll think that, a good chunk of the underlying platform is coming from Microsoft, and then the ISV is building just some IP. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but they're building IP that runs on top of that. The trick is when it gets to the point that an SI has got an ISV business that might well be spun out as a separate company within the same parent company. What if that ISV now wants to sell its product to one of the SI's competitors? And I've seen this. In fact, I've actually got 3 examples in my 6 partners where this is exactly what's happening.
Wow.
And in one case, I sat them down and I said to them, basically, what is it that you're in business to do? Is it to sell your IP to whichever customer wants to buy it, and your professional services organization is only there to make sure it's deployed successfully? Or is your remit to sell thousands of consulting hours, and the sweetener for that, the worm on the hook, is this bit of IP that you're going to sell the customer? And I've had radically different answers come back from a couple of those partners, and I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong, but it just helps you understand the motivation of that company. Are they there because they are a consulting firm that's looking to use IP as a way of maybe making a bit more money off repeatable stuff, or are they there as a software company and they would rather not even have any professional services if they could get away with it, and just rely on a bunch of SIs to do that all for them?
I think we're going to continue to see an evolution in the space as the lines get blurred more and more.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah. Okay, some quickfire questions for you. Before we get onto them, are there any specific resources or anything like that you can recommend people go look, read if they want to get up to speed on particularly ISV Connect Program, anything like that?
There's some really complete documentation on Microsoft.com actually about all of this stuff. And so in fact, if a partner came to me and said, how do I get up and running with ISV Connect, I would go to my favorite search engine, Bing, and I would type in ISV business applications ISV Connect Program, enter, and the top link is, this is everything you need to do to get up and running with this, from creating your account at Partner Center, setting up all the billing stuff, blah 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 blah, and here are all the steps. So yeah, do that.
Fantastic. Okay, some quickfire questions for you. Now, these are nothing to do with business as such, but more about life, and they're very, very random. First one, if you could instantly be an expert in a subject, what would it be?
Tattoo removal.
Okay. Interesting. Would you rather die before your partner or after?
Oh, definitely before.
Yeah. What's your best scar story?
I was setting the record for cycling around a particular course in my neighbourhood when I was about 14. And I was a keen cyclist, and I therefore knew I was going to break the record. And unfortunately, as I clipped the curbstone, because I was leaning in a bit too much, I ended up fracturing my skull and being in hospital for 2 weeks. So I've probably got a big scar on the top of my skull.
What's the last product you returned?
I honestly can't remember.
Fair call. What stereotype do you completely live up to?
Get distracted by the shiny.
What's your most powerful and vivid memory?
Wow, it's deep stuff.
Staring into the bottom of a empty beer glass?
Powerful and vivid memory. I've got a particular memory of my school days, which it was. I was running. I used to get let out early to go to catch a train. So there was like 3 or 4 of us that we got out 5 minutes early, just so we were way ahead of everyone else. And as it turns out, the school that I went to, we had to wear a cap, and when we were out in public, basically. And there was an exit from the back of the school where you're supposed to run all the way to the back gate and then all the way down the side of the building. And in order to shave another minute or so off, we used to just run out and jump over the fence. Anyway, one day, turns out the headmaster was taking a class because the teacher wasn't around, and he was standing gazing out the rear window of the school, and he said to the class, and I was like 10 or 11 at this point, he said to the class, there's Dalton not wearing his cap and he's jumped over the fence. I'll have his guts for garters in the morning. So the next day I come in and the whole school's basically giving it, "Ooh, you're in trouble." And I then got hauled up to the headmaster's office. So all of that compressed into the dread, the fear, the shame. It turns out nothing happened in the end. But
Good story. Who would you recommend as a guest for the podcast in future?
Well, in the business applications space, I think Pat Fitzhenry, my colleague, would probably be worth talking to if you haven't spoken to him already.
No, I haven't.
Pat's been in. He was part of Solomon Software That got acquired, and then he's ended up in Microsoft in that direction, and he's been in the biz apps and the Dynamics space for 20 years, basically. So he knows everyone, it seems.
Very good, very good. Ewan, it's been great to have you on the show. If people want to connect with you online or follow any of your posts or your VintageWatchAdvisor website, etc., where can you recommend they find you?
I would start with LinkedIn.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you've not left a rating or feedback on iTunes, please, can you go up there, leave us some feedback. If you go to nz365guy.com/iTunes, I've created an auto-direct that'll take you straight to the feedback page on iTunes to give us a rating. At the moment, I've been maintaining a 5-star rating, so if you want to keep that going, it would be much appreciated. Full show notes for this episode, of course, can be found at nz365guy.com/148. See you next time.